Whose Range Rover is this, and why is it leased under a corporation? Show me your ID.
Officer, I'm fueling my vehicle. Unless I'm being detained for a specific crime, I'm not required to ID.
Don't play lawyer with me. Hands on the car, now.
Call your supervisor. You're about to put hands on a Superior Court judge in broad daylight.
Officer Kyle Rourke had been patrolling the affluent suburban streets of Chesterfield for 6 years when he made the decision that would not only end his career, but cost the county's taxpayers $14.2 million. He was 29 years old, a man who prided himself on what he called his street instincts, though his personnel file suggested those instincts were little more than thinly veiled prejudices. Rourke viewed himself as a sheepdog protecting the flock, constantly scanning for wolves. But on a bright Tuesday shortly after noon, his inability to distinguish a wolf from a shepherd would lead to a catastrophic legal collision. He was sitting in his cruiser, idling near the exit of a crowded Chevron station, watching the pumps. It was a beautiful day, the kind where families were out running errands and retirees were washing their cars. But Rourke wasn't looking at the families. His eyes locked onto a pristine black Range Rover autobiography that had just pulled up to Pump 4. The vehicle was brand new, gleaming under the midday sun with dark-tinted windows that were legal but to Rourke immediately suspicious. When the driver's door opened, Rourke sat up straighter. A black man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp navy polo shirt and tan slacks. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence that Rourke interpreted as arrogance. The man didn't look around nervously. He didn't check his mirrors. He simply slid his credit card into the reader and began fueling the luxury SUV. In Rourke's mind, the narrative was already written. This vehicle didn't belong in this neighborhood, and this driver didn't look like the typical Chesterfield resident Rourke was used to servicing. He ran the plates. They came back to a generic leasing corporation, which was common for high-end vehicles, but Rourke decided it was a red flag for a drug courier. Without a single traffic violation, without a call from dispatch, and without a shred of probable cause, Officer Rourke put his cruiser in drive. He was going to investigate. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe that law enforcement officers should be held to the highest standards of the Constitution, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one act as a mirror to our justice system, and we need your help to keep holding it up. The man standing at Pump 4 was Marcus Sterling. At 62 years old, Sterling was a pillar of the legal community, though Officer Rourke had no way of knowing that, nor did he care to find out. Sterling had spent 30 years in the trenches of the justice system. He began his career as a public defender fighting for the indigent before switching sides to become one of the state's most formidable prosecutors. For the last 12 years, however, he had served as a senior Superior Court judge. In the courtroom, Judge Sterling was known as the Hammer, not because he was cruel, but because he was unyielding when it came to procedure and constitutional rights. He had zero tolerance for sloppy police work, and even less for defendants who refused to take responsibility. On this particular Tuesday, Judge Sterling was essentially off the clock, but his mind was still working. He was on his way to the state capitol to deliver a keynote address at a judicial conference regarding the Fourth Amendment and the eroding protections against unreasonable search and seizure. The irony of the moment would only become apparent later. He stood by his vehicle enjoying the warmth of the sun, mentally rehearsing his opening remarks. He had chosen the Range Rover for its safety rating and comfort, a reward to himself after 3 decades of public service. He wasn't thinking about crime. He was thinking about whether he should stop for an iced tea before hitting the highway. He noticed the police cruiser slowly rolling toward him, but he paid it little mind. In his world, police officers were colleagues, people who stood when he entered a room. He had no reason to fear them. He assumed the officer was perhaps coming to use the restroom or grab a coffee. It wasn't until the cruiser angled sharply across the front of his SUV, blocking his exit, that Sterling realized something was wrong. He watched the officer exit the vehicle, young, high and tight haircut hand, resting casually but intentionally near his holster. Sterling sighed, the first strictures of annoyance tightening his chest. He knew this look. He had seen it on the faces of rookie cops in his courtroom 1,000 times. It was the look of a man who thought he had just caught a prize. Officer Rourke approached with a swagger that compensated for his lack of actual authority in this situation. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how the day was going. He walked right up to the pump invading Sterling's personal space and looked the older man up and down. "Whose vehicle is this?" Rourke asked, his voice flat and commanding. Sterling paused, replacing the gas nozzle and screwing the cap back onto his tank before turning to face the officer. He kept his hands visible, a survival habit ingrained in every black man in America regardless of his status. "It is my vehicle, officer," Sterling replied, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that usually commanded silence in a courtroom. "Is there a problem?" Rourke didn't like the tone. It wasn't submissive. It was the voice of an equal, and Rourke didn't see this man as an equal. "It's a nice car," Rourke said, stepping closer, looking through the window at the leather interior. "A little too nice for Tuesday afternoon joyride. You got ID on you." Sterling remained perfectly still. He knew the law better than Rourke ever would. He knew that in this state, this was a consensual encounter, or it should have been. He was not operating the vehicle on a public roadway. He was standing at a private business. "Officer," Sterling said calmly, "unless I am being detained for a specific crime or traffic violation, I am not required to present identification. I am simply purchasing fuel." Rourke's face flushed. This was the jailhouse lawyer routine he hated, suspects who watched too much TV and thought they knew their rights. "I can detain you for suspicious activity," Rourke snapped, "and right now you fitting the description of a suspect in a stolen vehicle ring makes you suspicious." It was a lie, a fabrication on the spot to justify his aggression. Sterling saw right through it. "Which stolen vehicle ring?" Sterling asked, tilting his head slightly. "The one involving 2024 Range Rovers that haven't been reported stolen. I invite you to run the VIN. It will come back to me." Back. Rourke moved in his hand, dropping to his belt. "I'm telling you to show me your ID, or we're going to have a problem." Sterling took a breath. He decided to offer the officer an off-ramp, a chance to save his career before he drove it off a cliff. "Young man, I am a Superior Court judge. My identification is in my pocket. If I reach for it, I want you to understand exactly who I am and that I am doing this as a courtesy, not because your demand is lawful." Rourke laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. "Yeah, and I'm the police commissioner. Quit lying and put your hands on the car." The atmosphere at the gas station shifted instantly. Customers at nearby pumps stopped fueling. A woman in a minivan froze the squeegee in her hand, dripping onto the concrete. They were watching a young white police officer verbally berate a well-dressed, older black man who was standing calmly by his luxury car. Rourke felt the eyes on him, but instead of making him cautious, it made him performative. He felt he needed to assert dominance to maintain control of the scene. "I gave you a lawful order," Rourke shouted, escalating his volume to draw attention to his own authority. "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle now. I have committed no crime," Sterling said, his voice steady but carrying firmly across the lot. "I am asking you to call your supervisor. Do not touch me." This was the breaking point for Rourke. In his mind, refusal to comply was the same as physical resistance. He lunged forward, grabbing Sterling's left arm and twisting it behind his back with force that was entirely unnecessary. Sterling grimaced in pain as his shoulder strained, but he did not fight back. He knew that any movement could be interpreted as assault on an officer. Rourke shoved the 62-year-old jurist against the side of the Range Rover. The sound of Sterling's body hitting the metal echoed in the silence of the gas station. "You're under arrest," Rourke yelled, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Sterling said, clearly speaking not just to Rourke but to the witnesses raising their phones. "I am complying under duress. You are making a mistake that will end your career, officer." Rourke ignored him, snapping the cuffs on too tight. He patted Sterling down aggressively, reaching into his pockets and pulling out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. He didn't even look at the badge or the ID card inside. He just shoved it into his own pocket. "You can tell it to the judge." Rourke sneered, completely missing the irony that he was already speaking to one. He spun Sterling around and marched him toward the patrol car, pushing his head down roughly as he shoved him into the cramped back seat. By now, at least 5 people were recording. One man, a contractor in a pickup truck, shouted, "Hey, he didn't do anything. He was just getting gas." Rourke turned and pointed a finger at the witness. "Back off, unless you want to join him for obstruction." Rourke slammed the cruiser door, sealing Sterling inside the cage. "Do you think officers who escalate nonviolent situations should face immediate suspension? Let us know your thoughts in the comments." The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey of silence. Officer Rourke had expected the suspect to be pleading cursing or bargaining by now. Most people did. But the man in the back seat sat with his eyes closed, breathing rhythmically. Judge Sterling was not sleeping. He was memorizing. He was cataloging every bump in the road, the speed at which Rourke was driving, and the time that had elapsed since the initial stop. He was building his case file in his head. He thought about the Fourth Amendment violations. He thought about the assault. He thought about the deprivation of rights under color of law. But mostly he thought about the fear. He was a powerful man, a judge who dined with senators, and yet for those few minutes at the pump, he had been just another body subject to the whims of an armed man with a badge. He thought about his son, his nephews, and what might have happened if they had been the ones driving the car. Rourke pulled into the precinct Sallyport, feeling the adrenaline dump of a good bust. He parked the car and hauled Sterling out, marching him through the secure intake doors. The booking area was busy. Officers were processing paperwork, a drunk driver was singing in a holding cell, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Rourke pushed Sterling toward the intake desk. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Miller, the watch commander. Miller was 55 years old, a veteran of the force who was counting down the days to retirement. He was drinking a diet soda and reviewing a shift schedule when Rourke walked in. "What do we have, Rourke?" Miller asked without looking up. "Failure to obey resisting arrest, probable stolen vehicle," Rourke announced proudly. Guy refused to ID, claimed he was a judge. Sergeant Miller looked up. The soda can froze halfway to his mouth. He squinted his brain, trying to reconcile the image before him with the context of Rourke's words. He looked at the man in handcuffs, the graying temples, the dignified posture, the face he had seen on the local news and in the courthouse hallways for over a decade. Miller's face went the color of old ash. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Rourke," Miller whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" "I told you he refused to." Rourke started, but Miller cut him off with a roar that silenced the entire room. "Get those cuffs off him. Now. Right now." Rourke froze, confused. "Sarge, that is Judge Marcus Sterling, you idiot," Miller shouted, coming around the desk. "Unlock him immediately." The silence that fell over the precinct was absolute. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Rourke's face went pale. His hands shook as he reached for his keys. He fumbled with the lock, the metallic click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. As the cuffs fell away, Judge Sterling rubbed his wrists. He didn't look at Rourke. He looked directly at Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant," Sterling said, his voice calm but icy, "I would like my wallet back, and I would like to speak to the Chief of Police, immediately." The next 48 minutes were a blur of bureaucratic panic. The Chief of Police arrived from a lunch meeting, tie askew, breathless. He ushered Judge Sterling into his office, offering water, coffee, an ambulance, anything to stem the bleeding. Sterling refused it all. He simply wanted his property, and he wanted the body camera footage secured. "I am not looking for special treatment," Sterling told the chief. "I am looking for the law to be applied. If this officer treats a superior court judge this way, I shudder to think what he does to the young men in this community who have no voice." Meanwhile, Officer Kyle Rourke was stripped of his badge and gun and placed in a conference room. He was suspended pending investigation, but the real investigation was happening in the records room. As the command staff pulled Rourke's personnel file, the narrative of one bad mistake quickly crumbled. This was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The file revealed 14 prior citizen complaints over his 6-year career. They were almost identical aggressive stops of minority drivers' searches without probable cause, rude and escalating language. In every single instance, the complaints had been marked as unfounded or exonerated by his previous supervisors. The system had protected him. The blue wall had insulated him from consequences, emboldening him to push further and further until he pushed the wrong man. News of the arrest broke before the sun went down. The video from the gas station hit social media and went viral instantly. The optics were indefensible, a young white officer manhandling an elderly black man who was clearly offering no resistance. When the press identified the suspect as Judge Sterling, the story went national. The governor issued a statement. The NAACP organized a press conference on the precinct steps. But for Rourke, the reality was just setting in. He wasn't just losing a job. He was becoming the face of everything wrong with modern policing. Judge Sterling didn't just want an apology. He wanted systemic change. He hired a top-tier civil rights firm not because he needed the money, but because he knew that in America, the only language institutions truly understand is financial liability. The lawsuit named Officer Rourke the police chief and the city. It alleged false arrest, excessive force, and a policy and custom of ignoring racial profiling complaints. The discovery phase of the trial was devastating for the department. Sterling's lawyers subpoenaed everything email chains, text messages between officers, and the internal affairs reports of the 14 prior complaints. The trial held a year later was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day. When Rourke took the stand, he tried to maintain his tough cop persona, but under cross-examination, he withered. Sterling's attorney played the Bodycam footage frame by frame. "Officer Rourke," the attorney asked, "at timestamp 12:04, you stated the vehicle looked suspicious. Can you explain to the jury exactly what is suspicious about a legally parked $120,000 car?" Rourke stammered. It didn't fit the area." "And why?" the attorney pressed. "Did the driver not fit the area because he was black?" Rourke remained silent, his face turning red. "I used my instincts," he finally muttered. "Your instincts," the attorney countered, "cost this city its integrity." When Judge Sterling took the stand, the room went quiet. He didn't speak with anger. He spoke with a profound sadness. He described the humiliation of being handcuffed in public. He described the terror of the drive to the station. "I have sat on the bench for 12 years, Sterling told the jury. "I have sentenced men to prison. I believe in the law. But on that day, the law did not exist for me. I was stripped of my title, my rights, and my dignity, because one officer decided I didn't belong." He looked at the jury. "If I cannot be safe, who can be?" The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the state. They found in favor of Marcus Sterling on all counts. They awarded $4.2 million in compensatory damages for the emotional distress and violation of rights. But it was the punitive damages that made the headline. To punish the department for ignoring the 14 prior complaints and allowing Rourke to remain on the street, the jury awarded an additional $10 million, a total of $14.2 million. The aftermath was swift. Kyle Rourke was fired and his law enforcement certification was permanently revoked by the state board. He would never carry a badge again. The police chief was forced to resign. The city implemented a new oversight committee, one with the power to subpoena officer records and independently review complaints. The 14 complaints threshold was gone. Now a sophisticated early warning system tracked officer behavior for signs of bias. Judge Sterling donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for indigent defendants, the people he had worried about while sitting in the back of Rourke's cruiser. He returned to the bench, but he was different. He was softer in his demeanor, more probing in his questions to police officers who testified in his court. He had seen the other side of the blue line. As for the gas station, business went on as usual. But for those who lived in Chesterfield, the memory lingered. It was a reminder that prejudice doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a badge and a smile. It was a reminder that dignity is fragile, and justice is not self-executing. It must be fought for, sometimes at a cost of millions. We end this story with a question for you to carry into your day. If a Superior Court judge can be profiled handcuffed and humiliated in broad daylight, what protection does the average citizen really have? Is a badge a license to bypass the Constitution, or is it a heavy burden that should require constant proving? Judge Sterling fought back because he could. But for every Judge Sterling, there are thousands of others who are silenced, processed, and forgotten. This $14.2 million wasn't a lottery win. It was a penalty for a system that failed. It was a receipt for the cost of bias. Thank you for watching. If you believe we need more accountability in our justice system, please like this video and share it. It helps us tell the stories that matter. Stay safe, know your rights, and we'll see you in the next video.